Hello, everybody. My name is Federico Zilio, and I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Padua. Today, I'm going to talk about the temporo-spatial consciousness, looking for a common denominator between lived experience and neurodynamics. The starting point is about the neurophenomenological approach as an attempt to build a non-reductive bridge between neurodynamics and experience. This approach is different from the classical neurocognitive approach that conceives the consciousness as a qualitative content produced by the brain and within the brain in a discrete space and time. Instead, starting from a phenomenological understanding of experience as a temporalization and spatialization process, we wanted to take a spatio-temporal neuroscientific approach that focuses on the spontaneous activity of the brain as the temporal structure of the brain itself. As sustained by the temporo-spatial theory of consciousness by Northoff, the spontaneous activity of the brain offers a repertoire of timescales that allows to encode the stimuli in a temporal way, making subjective experience possible as the temporalization of these stimuli. In this sense, the search for the neurocorrelates of consciousness is not sufficient, and we need to measure the spatio-temporal structure of the brain itself in relation to the body and the environment. So the first measurement is the power law exponent, which measures how the faster frequencies and their power are contained within the power of the slower frequencies. Thus, it measures the temporal structure and the fractal structure of the brain activity itself. The second one is the autocorrelation window, which measures the correlation of different time points in the brain activity. So it measures the temporal continuity in which many inputs can be processed and or selected. So using these measurements, we saw that the intrinsic neural timescales are crucial for the input processing of external and bodily inputs. We recently found that sensory deficits, as in disorder of consciousness or alteration of consciousness, as in anesthesia or sleep, are associated with abnormal prolonged intrinsic neural timescales, which is something that we don't see in healthy people and patients with motor deficits, but preserved sensory capacities, as in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. This means that when we are losing consciousness, we cannot discriminate anymore one input to another, like in a very large box when everything is put together without any difference. Other colleagues of our team also found that the intrinsic neural timescales are strongly associated with the self-related information, and also that modifications of intrinsic neural timescales are related to specific psychopathological symptoms like schizophrenia, depression, and autism. So we can say that the intrinsic neural timescales can be conceived as the neural marker of our capacity to process, adapt, and align to the temporal features of the surrounding environment. Our repertoire of timescales indeed somehow models the way in which we perceive things from a subjective and thus temporal perspective. To really understand their role, I think that we should move from a neurocentric model of consciousness, understood as a product of the brain, to a neuroecological model, where consciousness is understood as an environment-body-brain alignment. In this alignment, the time is the common currency between the neural, bodily, and mental features, so between the brain activity as such and the consciousness intended as temporalization. In this regard, these are the two new neurophenomenological challenges. The first one is to link the lived experience with the temporal dynamics of the brain instead of merely reducing consciousness into discrete points into the brain. And the second one is that at the same time, we need to refine our neural measurements like the power law exponent and the autocorrelation window on the basis, on the phenomenology of consciousness itself, understood as temporalization of the world and of ourselves. Thank you so much.